What's an executor and how does one accidentally become one? And for that matter, what's a will and why do I need one? The answer to those questions and more in this video. At the end of this video, you should be familiar with the term executor, will, beneficiary. But first, the standard disclaimer. I was a lawyer licensed to practice law in the province of Ontario, but I have since retired. The information in this video is not legal advice. It is legal education. I am not and will not tell you what to do in your specific situation. I will give you enough information to have a knowledgeable conversation with your lawyer. The laws change by province to province and from state to state and from country to country. Where you have a question about your specific situation, talk to a lawyer in your area. Where the information in this video conflicts with their advice, listen to them. They went to law school in your area and know your laws. If you're lost in the world of legal jargon, I'm going to help you try to find your way out. Let's get on with the video. So what is a will and what is an executor? A will, as most of you know, is nothing more than a formal document with a bunch of instructions on how to get rid of your stuff. Who gets it, why they get it, all that stuff. The person that carries out those instructions is your executor. But why do we have wills? Well, if you go way back in history, generally speaking, when you died, everything you owned went back to the monarch of the country. That rule still exists, but rich people didn't like that rule, so they hired a bunch of lawyers to find a way around it. They came up with the will. They figured out that if you get rid of everything before you die, the king gets nothing when you die under that rule. So the concept behind a will basically is that the minute before you die, everything you own passes to your estate trustee, your executor. There's some difference between the two, but at this point it doesn't matter. Your will tells your executor who to give your stuff to, so that the king gets none of it. It happens before you die, legally, not technically. Everything is passed after you die, but everything passes to your executor before you die as a legal concept. So there you go. When you die, everything passes to your executor, who gives it to the people in your will. They're called beneficiaries. So when you die, everything you own goes to your executor, who gives it to your beneficiaries. That's wills in a nutshell. There's a lot more nuance, but that'll do for the topic in this video. Alright, so now that we know who the executor is, what their role is, and why it matters, let's talk about how they accidentally become one. Let's go back to our 15 words of terror. All to my spouse, and then to my children equally, but Bob gets my guitar. Do you see the pattern? When you die, everything goes to your executor, who gives it to the beneficiaries. All to my spouse, and then to my children equally, but Bob gets my guitar. Your spouse just became the executor, not the beneficiary. Your spouse doesn't get anything. They get to give it to your kids. Yeah, that's why it matters. But wait, you say, everybody knows that the intended beneficiary was your spouse, not your kids. When would that ever come up? Well, consider for a minute your 80-year-old father just married perky 20-year-old, went off on a honeymoon and came back, scrawled on a piece of paper the magic words of terror, all to my spouse and then to my children equally, but Bob gets my guitar, signed it, dated it, shoved it on the night table. In the morning, he's dead. Who do you think is going to say, stepmom is an executor, not a beneficiary? Yeah, that's when it matters. Now, leaving aside that the law treats wills made with death pending imminent a little differently, because they don't look, courts don't look for as much formality in a will when you're laying upside down in the back 40 under a tractor as they do when you're sitting in a lawyer's office preparing to sign a document that you've thought long and hard about. And this is a handwritten will made close to death. Whether Dad knew he was going to die is probably going to be a live issue if it ends up in front of a court. But that's for another day. That's just an example of where it matters, whether you're an accidental executor or an intended beneficiary. Anyway, so you would think this is a fairly simple problem to solve, and it is. All you have to do is name an executor in your will. Taylor shall be my executor. Yeah, and that is normally done very early in your will. The first couple of paragraphs identify you and what occupation you may have had, that type of thing, a statement that you're of sound-minded body, whatever it is that's legally required in your area, your lawyer will know. And then there will be an appointment of executor and a state trustee, and a statement of what they can and cannot do, such as pay the just debts of your estate and whether or not they can be paid for their endeavors, things like that. It's pretty boilerplate. It goes in every will pretty much the same way. Your lawyer will know what needs to be there, so don't worry about it. What you need to worry about is who the executor will be. Remember, they get control of all of your assets and have to give it to people they may not like. Yeah. So you don't want somebody who's going to run away with your assets or hold on to them and frustrate your wills and never give them to the beneficiaries, because that's just a will fight. But you are going to have to pick an executor. You can pick 2 or 3 depending on the state that you're in or the province that you're in. You can pick an alternate, such as Taylor, but if Taylor dies, pick Bobby, that type of thing. But your lawyer will know, so when you go to speak to your lawyer, have at least 2 names, because that's helpful. So what happens if I die without a will? Well, I said earlier that the rule from history is that if you die without a will, the monarch gets everything, the state, the province, whoever. But rich people don't like that rule, so they pressured politicians into passing laws. Pretty much every state and province has a law dealing with people who die intestate, and they all basically say that somebody can apply to the courts to be the estate trustee or executor, but that's an expensive process. And it usually ends up in a will fight, because if there's money, everybody wants to be that. And there's also rules in that statute that say who gets what and what share and how to distribute it. But if you die and you have no relatives to give stuff to and nobody wants to be your executor, it all goes to the state. So, yeah, that's what happens if you die without a will. You end up spending a whole lot of your estate on legal fees to get an executor put in place. A lot cheaper to put a will in place. So what did we learn? Well, we learned what a will is, why you need one, what happens if you don't have one, what an executor is, why you need one, and why that needs to be in your will. We learned who a beneficiary is, that sort of thing. But we're not out of the woods yet. So if you've enjoyed the video, leave me a comment so that the algorithm knows to show this to more people. If they're people that you think would benefit from this information, share the link with them. Tell them to go watch it. Anyway, I appreciate you watching the video. If you found it helpful, leave me a comment. But we're not out of the woods, so I'll see you on the next one. I said earlier that there was some distinction between an estate trustee and an executor, and there is. Technically, as a legal construct, everything you own falls into a trust immediately before you die, and your estate trustee manages that trust for the benefit of the beneficiaries. The executor is a person who carries out the instructions in your will. In theory, you could appoint two different people to those roles. But that just sets up a fight when the executor wants the estate trustee to give up control of some of those assets. That's just a problem waiting to happen. So practically, your estate trustee and your executor are almost always the same people.